turn to Professor Gerald Steinberg, who has some new and compelling information for us.
Like Dan, I'm not happy with the term propaganda in the title of the panel. I do think that what we've heard a lot today is the use of the term political warfare in different forms. And I think that's what we have to recognize. It. One of the panelists, and I forgot who, it was an excellent presentation, talked about what political scientists call the hard war, the killing, the beheading, the bombing, the tunnel attacks, the terrorism, the kidnapping. That's hard warfare, hard power warfare. The soft power warfare is exactly what happens in parallel, the political warfare. The claims of civilian casualties, the creation of frameworks by the United Nations Human Rights Council to investigate Israeli war crimes, the BDS movement. It's all the demonization, the boycotts, all of that are connected, and that for Israel is the soft power war. There are different versions we see of ISIS that was presented the way ISIS uses the internet in a very effective way. Dan, the SMSs that we got were part of that type of, some people would call it psychological. Those are different aspects, but it's much more complex than that. Now, I'm not going to be adding any new information on that. I'm going to focus on one issue today, and that is all of the money that goes into this political warfare. That's essential. Like any other form of warfare or any other form of serious political activity, one needs to have a significant budget to do this. It's not trivial. It's not three people sitting with a laptop in some cave somewhere. This is a huge industry, and a large part of it, we talked about the influence on the media and other things. UNRWA is very closely connected with this industry. This is a multi-billion-dollar, pound, krona, euro industry throughout the world, and a significant, completely disproportionate percentage. We hear a lot about disproportionate when they talk about Israel. Well, in this political warfare, a completely disproportionate percentage of this money, large parts of it coming from Western governments, particularly in Europe, that are directed, exploited, abused for this kind of political warfare. And that's what I've been doing in NGO Monitor for the last 13 years. It was going to be a one-year project. I will say, like others, I'm supposed to do this in around, I say I have 12 minutes, that's good, and I'll try to do it in less time than that. This is a 14-week course that I teach, so I'm going to try to just hit the high points and give you one very clear example of how this process works. And this one is actually more related to terrorism directly, the hard warfare, than the soft warfare, although the two overlap a lot. There's an organization, oh, this is how I change the slides, right? There's an organization called Islamic Relief Worldwide. I just want to re-emphasize this is part of a much wider pattern. Each European government provides millions of their currency, pounds, euros, dollars, whatever, to a long list of humanitarian aid and human rights organizations that engage in different forms of political warfare, and to some degree, as the case I'm going to talk about, get involved in supporting terrorism directly, and this is the case of Hamas. This is a Western Europe-wide problem, and as I will show you, Europe is in denial. I don't know if there are any European officials here or journalists, but there's always, why is Europe not even, and I'll show you the quotes from the documents that demonstrate that Europe is completely in denial. Very briefly, and I won't dwell on this, these are the things that NGO Monitor does in terms of demanding and trying to expose these funding processes. They're very secretive, as I'll show you. Transparency, accountability, due diligence, those are all lacking in this kind of funding, and effective charity regulation, which I'll talk about towards the end. By the way, this PowerPoint presentation will be available later on. I can give you the URL to download it if anybody's interested. On June 19th, 2014, a couple of months ago, the Israeli Defense Minister, speaking for his ministry, not on an individual capacity, after a detailed investigatory process in 3 layers, which I don't have time to go into, issued a regulation, a pronouncement that an organization called Islamic Relief Worldwide was defined as illegal under Israeli jurisdiction because it was providing support for Hamas. And NGO Monitor, when we saw this, we have a file on a lot of NGOs. The Islamic Relief Welfare, Islamic Relief Worldwide, is I talked about the NGO industry. This is an organization funded by the European Union directly, by the British government, Department for International Development, Spanish government, Swedish government, Swiss government, UN agencies, Oxfam, all providing money to the total of 26 million pounds, which is almost $40 million in American money. That's a lot of money for one organization. And the question was, if the Israeli government, again, after a detailed investigation, found evidence and determined that IRW is channeling money to Hamas, what are these governments doing to ensure that their money is being used as it is intended for humanitarian aid and not for channeling to Hamas? And this is not a unique case. There are many examples, Interpol and others. Funding for Hamas, funding for Hezbollah, funding for ISIS now. All of these organizations have an extensive network, and many of these organizations are defined as charities. And many of them get funding directly from their governments for humanitarian aid. One of the characteristics of most Western European governments is that they subcontract out their humanitarian aid. The Dutch government provides 100 million euros a year to an organization, ICO, a church organization that happens to fund electronic intifada in Ali Abu Nima, just as one example of political warfare. This is, each country, I could give you an hour and a half at least on each one. So what is the United Kingdom, the European Union, Spain, Switzerland, Oxfam? What are they doing? The Catholic Relief Agency in the UK. The United Nations, of course, also, you're talking about almost half the amount coming from the UN, or a third of it. What are they doing in terms of due diligence? Is their money going to Hamas? What other organizations are following a similar pattern? This is the correspondence that we got. I'll show you the course. So some of the letters that we got were just simple dismissals. A couple of countries didn't bother to answer. This is all on our website, on the NGO Monitor website. This is the correspondence, and it's not unique. It's quite typical. We sent a list of questions to the European Union head of delegation and to the Department for International Development of the British in the UK, asking them precisely what I said. Did their governments provide additional funding, because we only have the published information 2012 for IRW? What form of evaluation do they have in order to determine whether or not the money is used as intended, particularly in terms of diversion to Hamas in this case? How do they respond to the Israeli finding that IRW was in fact directing their donor money to Hamas? And the response that we got was, first of all, there is a standard, the basic bottom line is we're not going to answer your questions. It was a detailed letter, but what they said was that the European Commission does not provide global funding. So first they say, we only fund projects. We don't fund the IRW. Everybody says we only fund projects. So where do they get the money for their offices, for their fundraising, for their websites? And this is a standard. We found that Hanan Ashrari's NGO called Miftach has a number of statements on it, and basically one very blatant anti-Semitic statement right after President Obama was here in the spring, in which somebody from that organization said, President Obama, do you know that Jews use the blood of Christian children for the matzot that they make? This was on Hanan Ashrari's website, which was funded by all these European governments, and they all said, no, that's not our, somebody else funded that. Somebody else funds the website. We only fund education for high school students or something like that. So there's this denial process, we only fund projects, as if somehow these organizations don't have an entity, only projects have an entity, and no money is ever transferred from a project to the overall structure of the organization, to salaries and other things. Okay, and then they say in 2010, yes, a project was awarded to IRW. They explained it was to strengthen the capacity of Palestinian non-state actors into finding, okay, for humanitarian purposes. There was a project that was awarded. And then they say, we are not aware of anything which would suggest IRW is not in good standing with its regulatory body. In other words, we didn't check. There's a regulatory body, it's called the Charity Commission in the UK. Until the Charity Commission tells us that our money's being abused, it's okay. So we're not going to respond to your question or to the Israeli government. And this, again, I said, is quite typical. The British government got sent the same letter to the British government, DFID, and the British response, as is standard now for all questions like this that are posed to the DFID, is that they sent it to the Freedom of Information Framework, the broader Freedom of Information Framework, the bureaucracy. And the Freedom of Information Framework responded by saying, we're not giving you anything. We're withholding, I think it was a 7-page letter with a lot of legal language. It's, again, posted on our website. We are withholding in full. We are not answering your questions. Because, listen, look at the reasons why. We are protecting the legitimate commercial interests of those who share information with DFID. IRW, Islamic Relief Worldwide, a registered charity in the UK with a £26 million income for 2012, is somehow linked to commercial interests. Frankly, I don't get it, and they never explained what that meant. We're talking about a charity, a nonprofit. Where are the commercial interests? That's one of the, in the Freedom of Information laws, that's one of the reasons that a government can provide, in the case of the British government, for not releasing sensitive information. And all we asked was, what steps are you taking in order to ensure that your money doesn't go to Hamas or to terrorist organizations? Are you aware of, are you in contact with the Israeli government regarding their findings? And then they talk, there's another reason that they talk about, language is also interesting. Factors against disclosure include the strong public interest in ensuring that disclosure of information does not expose DFID, the government donor frame, or any of our partners to criminal acts. If we provide the information that you want, you or somebody else may commit criminal acts. Are we going to behead somebody because we find out that IRW is not being monitored by the British guy? It's amazing, the kind of language that's used here. We have concluded the balance of public interest in this case favors withholding the information requested. There is no checks and balances process. There are no guidelines. There is no due diligence. It is for a democratic society that prides itself, the UK and all of Western Europe, on its democratic values, which it considers as part of its normative public policy, its soft power public policy, is telling us that we are not providing the information that's required, neither we're providing it to Parliament or to journalists. Don't bother us. We're giving out these hundreds of millions of pounds every year to all sorts of organizations, and this is, again, not by any means the only such response that we got. We had a lawsuit, which I won't get into, which we also lost for similar reasons, to try to get this information out on funding. Now, the last development, which is quite interesting, is that the IRW itself, first of all, they said in response to our letters on June 19th, they explained that they were very surprised and concerned by the finding of the Israeli Defense Ministry, categorically denies any links with Hamas. And then they say how wonderful they are. They're regulated in the UK by the Charity Commission and has rigorous internal control and compliance. Trust us, that's what it says. It says trust us. Politics doesn't quite work that way. Warfare doesn't work that way, and this is political warfare. Trust us. This includes, okay, robust, sophisticated screening software solutions, other things which, frankly, it's just extra verbiage. September 1st, it changed a little bit, and I think it's important, but it's certainly not the end of the process. First of all, it shows that kind of pressure, what we call naming and shaming, has an impact. There are articles in the media about this issue, in the British media, about raising the question, is there due diligence? Is our government functioning according to democratic principles? Why are they being so secretive about this? And so on September 1st, the Islamic Relief Worldwide issued an announcement to say they're not taking donations from the Disasters Emergency Committee, which funds ostensibly the rebuilding of Gaza. There's a big campaign in the UK. And IRW said, we are not going to take money from this framework, which includes government funding, because we're going to check this out. IRW is a purely, again, how wonderful they are. We've categorically denied it was linked to Hamas. But as a responsible organization, we are looking into this matter thoroughly to ensure our processes for aid delivery have been followed. So we got to check. And then the bottom line, I think, is the key one. The UK Charity Commission is not investigating Islamic Relief Worldwide, partly, I would say, because IRW has said, okay, we'll check now. We're not going to completely deny it. Let's see what IRW comes up with in its investigation. To me, this is unprecedented. When we've talked, when we've examined Amnesty, Oxfam, Human Rights Watch, other groups, there's usually a blanket denial, no serious engagement. I'm not sure this is serious engagement. It says, trust us, that we're going to do our investigation. It's clearly not enough. But I would argue this is to ward off a charity commission process, where there's a little more teeth now in the UK Charity Commission to making sure that the funding doesn't go to terrorist groups, and you can understand why that has become important. So the question is now, what will happen with this internal investigation? It's not the end of the process by any means. I'll just add very quickly, I don't have any more time, but Oxfam is also, there is evidence that Oxfam has been involved because they say they fund and partner with IRW, also with the Union of God, which is declared by the United States, and I think some other countries, IHH, the Turkish organization that sponsored the flotilla in 2010 is part of Union of God. The U.S. defines it as a terrorist organization. Oxfam employees in Gaza, there's evidence that they're linked to Hamas and other terrorist groups. And so that's another issue that needs to be investigated. So far, they're entirely stonewalling the issue. Interpal, I don't have time to go through. People who know about the case know what a disaster that was and how the Charity Commission completely, in my personal opinion and others, did not fulfill its due diligence, its professional responsibilities in this case. I suggest if you want more information, that's why we have a website. We monitor about 150 organizations. We try to update it, and we're always interested in welcome cooperation on this. Finding where the money comes from is essential. It's not just from Qatar. It's not just from various oil-rich individuals or countries. Europe plays a central role, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and this is something that needs to be addressed in the broader issue of preventing the political warfare or defeating the political war aspect of terrorism. Thank you.